Hello and welcome to this latest ACM webinar. I'm your moderator today, Anthony Myers. So this week we are discussing EUDR compliance. More importantly, if you are an operator or trader intending to import any commodity, not just cocoa, into the European Union, all your options are explained here in this short but informative webinar. We concentrate on cocoa, but let's make it clear the companies involved here can do the due diligence for all the commodities. Anyway, today we are joined by expert panelists Salla Mankinen and Teemu Hurmeranta, co-founders of Orijin, a B2B company digitalizing the first mile of food supply chains. It helps first mile agri processors in coffee and cacao supplies particularly gain operational excellence through digital data and tools, fostering sustainability, ethical conduct, and compliance through the global supply chain. Anyway, that's enough of that for now. More from Salla and Teemu in a minute. But first, a quick recap, just in case you're here on this webinar, viewing this webinar, and you don't know particularly about the EUDR, and what it means. Most of you will know that the new European Union deforestation regulation kicks in a little over 3 months. This protocol states that any deforestation or forest degradation on the given plots of land shall automatically disqualify all relevant commodities and products from those plots of land from being placed or made available on the EU market or exported. As we mentioned before, it's essential to note that the EU views the legislation as binary. Cocoa entering the EU domain from the 30th of December this year, 2024, is either compliant or not in the EU terms. This is where Orijin comes in to help with compliance solutions with its partners, African Cocoa Marketplace, Data, and Demeter Holdings. They are part of a consortium, the Forests and Farmers First solution, that can help with risk assessments for any of the 7 commodities covered by this new EUDR legislation. I'll stop in a minute and introduce our guest, but if you have questions for our panelists, you should see a Q&A box on the screen where you can submit it while we're on air. We'll try to answer as many as we can. If not, we'll follow up with a post on LinkedIn on the ACM website. Okay, so Salla Mankinen is a technology and software systems engineer with decades of experience in building technology for big corporations as well as smallholder farm-based supply chains. Okay, Salla, enough from me. Tell us a little bit about Orijin and how it can help operators become fully compliant with the EUDR.
Okay, yeah, hi everybody. So thanks again, Tony, for the intros. So my name is Salla Mankinen, and I'm the CEO of Orijin. And as Tony mentioned, we provide operational management and traceability tools for coffee and cocoa producers and also other similar products. And now we also provide EUDR compliance solutions as part of the Farmers and Forest First consortium. So as Tony already described, for EUDR relevant products, when we place them into the EU market, we need to make sure that first, that they are deforestation free. And this is as per conclusion from the risk assessment conducted by the operator placing the product into the EU market. And with deforestation is being defined onwards from the cutoff date of December 31st, 2020. So second, they need to be produced in accordance with the relevant legislation of the country of production. And this is also as per the conclusion from the risk assessment conducted by the operator. And finally, they have to be covered by due diligence statement at the port of entry to the European Union. And where the condition of submitting this due diligence statement is that the risk assessment has been conducted. Additionally, in order for anybody to prove deforestation or illegality-free supply chains, the products pretty much have to be traceable. Otherwise, it's impossible to create credible due diligence statements or risk assessment. The EU then requires a due diligence statement to be submitted to the information system, which is called Strategist, and they will check the risk assessment documents in spot checks eventually. So it's good to know that EU doesn't define who needs to do the work required for the risk assessment or the due diligence statement. However, whoever is placing the product into the EU has to provide the due diligence statement and the risk assessment. So that means that ultimately the burden of collecting all this information and the documents falls on them. And they obviously free to talk to whoever they need to talk to get this information. And because much of the due diligence statement data can only be collected at the first mile of these supply chains, the requirements pretty much affect all the actors in these supply chains. So practically, what do you need to do in order to comply with these new requirements? So you need to be able to map out your supply chains to the farm level at the origin. So you need to be able to collect geo-coordinate data in the form of GPS coordinates, or if the farms or plots are bigger than 4 hectares in size, polygons are required. And polygons are just a collection of coordinates along the side of the border of the farm. So then you have to collect some legal information about the farm, such as the right to farm, for example. So in contrast to the geo-coordinate data, where the requirements are very exact, what needs to be collected, in the legal area, the requirements are pretty much the opposite, so very, very vague. It's not very clear, or it's not well defined what exactly you need to collect. However, you're supposed to the best of your ability, to assess the legal aspect of your supply chain as well. And this can be things like land tenure, right to farm, knowledge about the working conditions, for example. But just to be clear, it's not defined anywhere that you need to see or hold the land title documents of all your farms in the supply chain. So then the tricky bit, so the risk assessment, you need to conduct a risk assessment. And to be honest, to your best of your ability, you need to investigate your supply chain and determine whether or not there is a negligible risk of deforestation or illegality. So deforestation, again, here is defined after the cutoff date of December 2020. So any deforestation that happened before 2020 doesn't count. And legality is defined as per country of production. So you need to look into the relevant laws and put various EUDR relevant policies and procedures in place as well. So then you also need to have some sort of tracking system to track and trace your product from the farms of origin to the EU border, so that you can determine which farms contributed to the batch of product that is being imported. So the reason you have to do this is so that you can provide the exact geolocation coordinates of all the farms that contributed to that particular container batch, which is entering the European Union. You need to be able to enter those details into the EU Traces due diligence system. The EU can then come back to you and ask for the risk assessment, even though you're not submitting the risk assessment at the time when you submitting the due diligence statement. But you are supposed to have it ready when EU asks for it in the spot checks. So then the last step, covered many times already, is the due diligence statement system. And it's actually quite a simple system. It's only taking the coordinates of all the farms of this particular batch container that you are trying to import. And it's taking them in the format called GeoJSON with 6 decimal accuracy and with the max size limit of 25 megabytes, which makes around 30,000 polygons at the maximum. However, even though the due diligence statement has the predefined format, the risk assessment does not. So you can produce it in any way you like. And this is obviously a good and a bad thing. So it's a bad thing because it leaves many operators completely confused on what they should be doing and in which format. But on the other hand, it leaves you very flexible on what it means to do this risk assessment to the best of your ability. Okay, so now over to solutions. So Orijin, we provide a comprehensive EUDR compliance solution in cooperation with our partners in the Forest and Farmers First consortium. So we provide pretty much all the tools and services for all the necessary steps to get any actor in the supply chain compliant. So first, we have software dashboard tools to map out the supply chains and manage the farms and the farm detailed data. We then have offline capable mobile app to collect the geolocation data in the field or conduct the EUDR related legal surveys that are needed. We also provide you with those legal surveys and they are automatically configured so you don't have to come up with them. We then have automatic risk assessment system to score the deforestation and the legal risk of your operations. the system outputs the necessary documentation that can be directly then handed over to the EU authorities in case they request it. And our deforestation risk assessment is based on various checks on the geo-coordinates data itself. So we do polygon overlap checks, duplicate checks, validity checks, logical distance checks, and field age checks. And also forest degradation analytics, which is based on various land use and land cover maps, which can be free and open source, as well as satellite imagery, and even high resolution satellite imagery if that is needed for a particular case. We then provide a legal methodology through our partner ACM and the necessary documents for each country of production so that you can be at ease that you are covered from the legal perspective as well. And then we have our operational traceability tools to track and trace your products from the farm to the EU import level so that the chain of custody can maintain, which is required for the due diligence statement. And then at the end, we can automatically create the due diligence statement from the farm geo-coordinate data and the traceability data that we've collected, and even submit it to the EU system as the authorized representative. Or you can export the necessary GeoJSON format from our system at any point of time. Okay, so what if you don't want to or can't afford an integrated solution provider? So this is definitely possible, and EU has always made it very clear that you should be able to comply with EUDR by using inexpensive and readily available solutions as well. So you don't need expensive high-resolution satellite data in many cases to prove deforestation free. In many situations, you could prove lack of deforestation with a simple statement based on farm age and some proof that the farm has not got bigger since 2020. And I'll just briefly cover other tools for each of these key areas that you could use. So obviously spreadsheets are everywhere. You could use them to manage your farms, supply chains, and even your batch chain of custody. For the geo-coordinate data collection, in the simplest form, if you're just collecting GPS coordinates, you could just literally use any phone and just get the latitude and longitude from any maps application. So if the farms are bigger and you need the polygons, there are lots of free tools available. You could use to capture the polygons. You could use porting or hiking apps, such as there are Gaia GPS or even Strava could do this. Or some people have been using Garmin trackers to track their fields. So for the legal surveys, you could use ODK or its variations, such as there are COBA Toolbox and others, and hundreds of other surveying tools out there, including Google or Microsoft Forms. With the risk assessment, it's probably going to get a bit trickier. On the legal side, without any help, you would have to study EUDR and identify the relevant country-specific legislations and put the required policies and procedures in place. And you would have to decide which information you want to collect from your farmers and come up with the relevant questions, create the surveys, and then analyze the results and come up with some sort of conclusion on the risk of the farm. Then for the deforestation side, if you have a big farm, the deforestation risk assessment could be as simple as finding a 2020 satellite image from Google Earth or so and compare it to the current image, and then adding maybe some written proof that there are no changes to the farm area. Or you could prove that your farms are far away from any forests and they were established before 2020 and they have not increased in size with some simple logical statements without ever having to have to look at satellite images. And obviously there are lots of free resources out there in this space as well. So many people know Global Forest Watch, among others, and they use publicly available satellite images and data sets to maintain deforestation state around the world. The resolution of Global Forest Watch is not very, very high, and it sometimes gets a bit confused with coffee and cocoa plantations because they grow with shade trees and which pretty much look like a forest. But using Global Forest Watch could give you a good indication, at least on the regional forest cover chains, and then you can include that as part of your assessment. And finally, obviously, if you manage to do all these things above, you pretty much, I'm sure creating a GeoJSON output for the due diligence statement, it's not going to be that hard. And it is actually not very hard. You just need to have some entry-level tech skills to manage that work. Obviously, a huge benefit of using an integrated solution provider is that all your data is automatically connected. And if you do it on your own, you need to be able to match your geo data with your survey data, with your farm data, with your chain of custody data, and ultimately put all that into your due diligence statement. Yeah, and if I forgot any of the resources you might know regarding here, you can let us know and we'll put it on the list. But as a conclusion, it is definitely possible to be EUDR compliant on your own, but if you don't have if you don't want to or don't have the skills or capacity, there are definitely full service solutions out there that can take on part or all of that work for you. So that's the end of my quick presentation. So I'm just going to quickly show a screenshot of our own risk assessment scoring board. And then I'll leave you with this slide about our comprehensive risk assessment methodology, some of which we've already covered previously. Thanks a lot.
Okay, Salla, thank you so much. We were a little unfair inviting Salla on with all that she had, with the information that she has, and then asking her to put it into a 10-minute presentation, which she did, or just over 10 minutes, which she did brilliantly. And I'd just like to say that the presentation will be online, will be available online on demand on YouTube to the ACM website, so you can go back and revise all of that information that Salla gave there. It was a very concise overview and a very unbiased overview as well. It's basically Salla saying that you can do this yourself. I've made some notes that we hopefully will go back to later on, but the risk assessment side of it sounds like it's a tricky side, the legal side of things. But to be clear, the Forest and Farmers First Solutions is covering all options to operators, and it's from the low tech to the high tech, DIY, do it yourself, low cost to gold standard, for insurance products that can enter the EU. So really, again, it's whatever the budget is, what the size of your operation, however you want to tackle this, the FFF is there for you. But now we'll move on to the other thing that I think is important there as well is, and I think viewers will be interested in noting that. And I want to ask our next guest, Teemu, who's the CTO and co-founder of Orijin, an IT professional with 20 years in the business with a focus on data and business. And I'd like to say to him, one of the issues coming up is that, companies cannot approach, operators cannot approach this as a check the box approach to the EUDR. That's going to fail producers, and it's not going to help the fight against deforestation. So it's very important, this, not just a checking the box kind of exercise. So Teemu, if we can bring you into the conversation now, would you agree on that? And what would you say to that approach, and how to avoid that approach more importantly?
Thanks, Tony. I would say that definitely there's a lot still open on the EUDR. It has certainly raised awareness about deforestation and the issues in their supply chains, but really the long-term effect of EUDR will be so much defined by the level of inspections that the EU will actually be doing, and they have been so far very vague on what level of inspections they will be doing, at what scale, and what kind of proof is going to be acceptable. And kind of basically that precedent that they will set in the coming year is going to really define if EUDR is going to be a success or a check-the-box exercise, as you mentioned.
Okay, thank you. And Orijin's role in this, what's the specific part that Orijin plays in you're obviously an independent company, you've been doing this a long time for other commodities, other companies, but the role in the Forest and Farmers First Solutions initiative, what do you bring to that, Teemu, your company?
Orijin is really a data management system, almost like a farm ERP, if you will. Where you can gather and store all the raw data required for EUDR, including your farm coordinates, your farmer detail, legal surveys you have conducted, and all of your production and chain of custody data. And from there, our job is to kind of do our own analysis on the data and pass it on to third parties, such as our satellite partner for the deforestation analysis where needed, and to our legal partner ACM for analyzing the legality of the data, and then eventually compiling all of that into the due diligence statement and a ready risk assessment paper for your own records and for the coming inspection.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And another good question for you that I kind of in my research I've come up with, and I'm hearing this a lot. One of the main concerns is the European Commission, the regulatory body that are organising this for this legislation for the EU. Are they going to be ready to handle all the data that's coming from yourselves, from all over the sector, the industry, not just cocoa, other commodities? When the registry is open next month or November even, I think the trainers next month. How do you think they're going to be ready to handle all this data? I know you haven't got that inside information, but what do you think needs to be in place on that side of the process?
That's a very good question, and it remains to be seen. They have taken their time in opening up the due diligence submission system. It's going to be actually open to the public only on December 2024, which is quite late considering that by that time, a lot of the containers that are going to land in early 2025 are already shipped. And I think technically they will be ready, but I'm not sure if they are ready and knowing what to do with all that data. And that's the most interesting question in my mind.
Okay, thank you, Teemu. We have some questions coming in. We have one about translation of documents into different languages. I think there's the same. It's from Philip Henlin, based on the country they are working it with. For example, translating these documents into French if we are working in France. Very, very good point. Or will documents in an EU language be sufficient if this is not the official language of the country in question? That's a really good point. You know, we always think it's sorry, you know, I'm an English person, and everything's going to be in English, but some operators will struggle with that. And I think I've just got a note. If we can't answer that right now in this webinar, we'll look into it and we'll post something on the follow-up post on LinkedIn for that. But thank you, Philip, for that question. And I think, Salla, we'll go back to the risk assessments. And it's what I had some notes here. Sorry, I'm just going to the compliance side of things. It really is. It is. The risk assessment has no preset format, doesn't it? You can produce it in any way you like. This kind of good or bad thing is it leaves many operators completely confused on what they should be doing and in which format it has to be sent in. But on the other hand, there's the flexibility on what it means to do this risk assessment to the best of your ability. So that's the trickiest point, isn't it, Salla? I think, and I know not particularly your expertise in general, but what would you say to people that the risk assessment side of things? How can they manage that in a way that the due diligence statement will get passed by the EU?
I think the key would just to get started, to start doing these steps as defined in our presentation. Start mapping your suppliers, start mapping your farms, then start thinking of just simple legal questions that you need to find out. You know, do they have right to farm, for example? Do they have the land titles? Start collecting the polygons. Start using any resources you can find anywhere, Global Forest Watch, a solution provider, some other systems. Start looking at the polygons. Do they look like they near the forest? Start documenting those things. Start attaching screenshots and pictures and things like that. I think that would already take you somewhere. And obviously you could talk to us, any of the companies that in our consortium, we would be able to help you. But I think the biggest thing is just to get started and not to be afraid, not to get confused by the fact that there are no defined rules on how you're supposed to do this. Just get started and start doing something.
Okay, and that last slide was interesting, the transparent auditable methodology provided as part of the certification report that Orijin finds. That looks like the most complex because you're dealing with actors at country and farm levels, aren't you? As you showed in the certification report. Now, is that part of the more comprehensive due diligence report, or is that final certification report? Is that what operators will send, or is that part of the overall report will send in?
So this will be part of the risk assessment. So the due diligence statement itself is very simple. So there's only coordinates in there. So that's simple, but this is what we would offer as part of the risk assessment output. So that would be a fairly long document, a PDF document that you can then put into your records. We'll be listing all the individual farms, all the details for those farms, and then come up with all the risk levels, and we'll come up with scoring for those farms. And what's really important there is also provide the transparent and auditable kind of methodology, like how did we come to this conclusion? That's really important because some sort of service provider use more of a black box kind of approach. We don't want to do that. We want to show you like how did we come to this conclusion. For example, when it comes to the deforestation side of things, it's very important to know which data sets were used, which maps, which satellite image sets were used to come to this conclusion, and how did we come to that conclusion. So all those things will be also listed in this risk assessment output report.
Okay, thank you. And Teemu, I think another one of the important parts of all of this process is the prospect of risk, the risk of false negatives, wrongly assuming compliance when you get to send that the due diligence statement in. It's operational risk. I mean, there's financial risk, isn't there? Financial penalties, reputational impact, sanctions for non-compliance. So that's with the risk of false negatives, wrongly assuming your compliance. And then there's also a risk of false positives, wrongly assuming non-compliance, isn't it? I mean, it's a whole the kind of nightmare situation if you looked at it, if you were kind of having to deal with this. What's your advice to operators, producers, how to avoid these pitfalls?
Well, I think like Salla mentioned, being thorough is important. Recording the steps that you have made to come to your conclusion are important, so that in case there is a dispute, you can kind of prove that these were the data sets I used, this was the method, and that you have been kind of acting in good faith. And I think it really, once again, it will all boil down onto how strict the EU will be when they start looking at the initial risk assessments and what kind of leniency they will allow, and what kind of, handling of, for example, handling of the shade trees is a very good question. Are they just going to look at the data set on the satellite, or are they actually going to go look at the farm and kind of look at these type of details? And that's something we just don't know. So the best bet is to prepare, have your data, and kind of have a lot of transparency, because that's the only thing you can kind of have at your disposal if the inspections happen.
Okay, well, we are just under a minute. It's a hard stop with these webinars. We like to keep them tight and within the 30-minute deadline. So we are going to end it there. And I'll say goodbye to Salla and Teemu. Thank you very much for your insights on this topic. As we've mentioned, we'll attempt to answer any outstanding questions with a follow-up post on the African Cocoa Market page on LinkedIn. We'll be back with another webinar soon on this topic. The EUDR is not going away. In fact, it's going to be all over the place as we come up to the deadline in December. So please follow ACM on LinkedIn to stay up to speed with all developments and news related to the cocoa sector, of course. You can watch this webinar, as I've mentioned, on demand, and the presentation will all be there, and the information will all be there for you to look, view at, and absorb at your leisure. So I will say thank you again for watching. Thank you for the questions. Thank you everyone for taking part, the backroom staff as well for making this happen. And we'll see you next time. So thank you. Bye-bye.